From Focal Point Radio and WEBR in Fairfax, Virginia, this is the Mimi Geerges Show. After a terrorist bombing in Rome targeting Americans, ex-Navy SEAL Scot Harvath must track down the terrorist cells before they can carry out deadlier attacks. This is fiction, but New York Times bestselling author Brad Thor sounds some pretty loud alarms. His main character is part of a new spy agency within the Department of Defense. His job is to find, fix, and finish America's enemies, both foreign and domestic. Brad Thor's political thriller is called Foreign Influence, and he joins me in the studio. Then later in the program, he's been called America's best storyteller, Gene Weingarten of the Washington Post. But first, Brad Thor. Brad, welcome to the program.
Hi, Mimi. Nice to be here.
Your bio says that you served as a member of the Department of Homeland Security's Analytic Red Cell program. What is that?
The Analytic Red Cell Unit is something that the government put into effect after 9/11, probably one of the most forward-thinking and aggressive programs they've ever done. The idea was to bring creative thinkers into the Beltway from outside, to basically have Washington people say, you know what, we need other ways of looking at potential terrorist threats. And so creative thinkers, movie people, thriller novelists were brought in to help them anticipate, kind of look over the horizon and try to see where we might get hit and how we might get hit next by the terrorists.
So you actually would think up scenarios?
Absolutely. Same way I do for my thrillers.
And did you see any of your ideas come to fruition? I mean, did they have an impact?
Yes, they definitely did have an impact. And I joke around that this program is the Las Vegas of government programs, that what happens in the Red Cell Unit stays in the Red Cell Unit. There's one thing that the government made public about this unit. One of the things that or one of the scenarios they developed in there that they put out there, so it's okay for me to talk about, was they had looked into terrorists exploiting hurricanes. And what might they do in a hurricane? Would they attack shelters? Would they take advantage to plant bombs while police and other emergency service people were outside of a city? Like take New Orleans, evacuation. Would they come in and plant bombs hoping that they could detonate those bombs at a later time? They could hide them there, that kind of a thing. So it's really outside the box thinking, trying to stay 3 or 4 steps ahead of America's enemies.
Do you ever worry that you might be giving the terrorists ideas?
It's a great, great question. You know what? I hope that they are so devoid of creativity and good ideas that they've got to turn to thriller novels to get their ideas.
But if they're smart, they'll get them from wherever they can find them.
Absolutely. Clancy, in one of his books, had the idea of flying a plane into a joint session of Congress. I think it was a State of the Union address or something like that. And that came out well before 9/11 happened. And apparently Clancy had talked to an Air Force colonel he knew or something, I can't remember who he spoke to, and said, are you guys prepared for this? And he said, well, personally, I haven't heard of it, but I'm going to take it back and we're going to talk about it. I've got lots of intelligence and military sources that I use for my books, and they always get to see a draft of the book first. So I know I'm at least putting it into the hands of some decision makers and people that have ability to say, oh, we hadn't thought about this, or actually we're concerned about this, and can you modify it at all? Because I do share those books with them before they're out there in the marketplace, I'm not that concerned about giving terrorists ideas. I'd be out of business. If I was worried about that, I'd never be able to write thrillers like I do.
But why are you writing, Brad? Is it to sound alarms, or is this for the entertainment value?
Well, I look at it on several different levels. Number one, I am an entertainer. That's my job. My job is to give you, as the reader, the scariest white knuckle thrill ride I'm capable of. You can make more money. The one thing you can't make more of is your time. And so I feel it's incumbent upon me as the author to give you something of equal or greater value in return for the time you're giving me to read one of my books. So that's the entertainment factor. I really want you to have a great time. And of course, I'm the beach read guy. I'm competing with Patterson and Ludlum and all those kinds of people. But there also is part of me that is very concerned about these issues. Now, if I wanted to write solely about the issues, I'd be in the nonfiction world. And I certainly don't want to be preachy and be standing on a soapbox. This is supposed to be entertainment. So it's kind of this high wire act of I want people to have a really good time, but I also want to make them think a little bit. And I want people to finish the book and go, wow, I learned something interesting. I didn't know that. And now I know that. Now I want to know more.
Well, in addition to the entertainment value, you are making some political statements. And one of your characters in the book said this, quote, "When it comes to Muslim fundamentalists, the only thing they respect is force." President Bush tried that. He gave them a lot of force. But here we are years after 9/11, and it doesn't seem like we've made much progress.
Well, Islam has been violent since its inception. Islam has been around for 1,400 years, and it's going to continue to be violent. You use President Bush as an example. That's fantastic. After 9/11, we didn't have another successful terrorist attack in the United States. So I actually...
But we did have attempts.
We did have attempts.
I mean, clearly all these terrorist cells have not been dismantled in the United States.
No, they haven't. And it was Osama Bin Laden who said, if you show people a strong horse and a weak horse, people will automatically be drawn to the strong horse. And that's very true. Force is in the West, in Western society, we appreciate people who succeed based on our shared system of values. If someone's honest and someone's hardworking and all this kind of thing, that's what our respect for them is based upon, meeting those kind of moral standards, if you will. But everything that I've seen with Islamic fundamentalists, what they appreciate, what persuades them is force. They adhere to a radical ideology that is, and I'm going to forget who said this, but it was brilliant, this granite-like ideology. There is absolutely no room for equivocation or movement in this fundamentalist Islamic mindset, and the only thing that can move them at all is force. I really seriously, and that's why I wrote it in the book, I believe that the only thing they relate to is force. The radical fundamentalists want to impose a caliphate over the world. They are set on hegemony. And, we could still, if you could move Israel to an atoll in the South Pacific, and if we pulled all our troops out of the Middle East, it's not going to stop Islamic violence geared towards the West, directed at the West. It would still keep coming. It's not going to stop.
Brad Thor is in the studio with me. He's a New York Times bestselling author. His 9th book is called Foreign Influence. Well, this is another one of your characters says this, and I want you to comment on it because it's pretty inflammatory. It's, quote, "And before you give me that tired argument that fundamentalists have perverted the faith, let me be perfectly clear on something. A religion must stand or fall on its own writings and holy books. The fundamentalists haven't perverted anything. In fact, Osama Bin Laden is the best practicing Muslim out there. He is practicing Islam exactly the way that violent nutcase Muhammad wanted it practiced."
That is a line from the book. That is
pretty
character.
Inflammatory, Brad.
Right. This is not, that's a character, and that is a character's opinion in the book. And yes, is that inflammatory?
Yeah, but you wrote the book.
It's
a character.
No, I own it. If I was going to say it, that you have to give an author license to put a statement out there and to phrase it in a way that's consistent with the way a character speaks. The sentiment, I own 100%. Would I come out if I was being like if I was going to make that statement to you, I wouldn't make the statement that way. But the sentiment, yes, I say this all the time. Osama bin Laden is the best practicing Muslim out there because he is practicing Islam exactly the way Muhammad wanted it practiced.
Okay, so then we need to be at war with Islam, the religion of over 1 billion people around the world.
Well, let's be clear here, is that most Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people. Most Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people. But I seriously believe there is no such thing as peaceful and tolerant Islam. I'll give you my 30-second elevator speech on Islam when I try to explain to people who don't know anything about Islam what it is. You always hear this argument that, you're cherry picking from the Quran. You're picking out the violent verses, that there's peaceful verses throughout the Quran. Well, that's a half-truth. Yes, you can find peaceful verses throughout the Quran, but that's only because the Quran is not chronologically actually ordered. The Quran is ordered from longest chapter to shortest, basically starting with the second chapter, okay? And Muhammad's prophethood can be divided into two sections. His time in Medina, where he started, in Mecca, when he started his prophethood, when he was preaching peacefully, trying to attract Christians, Jews, pagans to his new religion. And then the other part in Medina, once he'd become a powerful warlord, and he became increasingly intolerant. And even Muhammad's followers came to him in that second portion of his prophethood and said, Muhammad, all this violence, you're starting to contradict yourself and what you said before. And Muhammad had a real problem on his hands, because how could Allah, who knew everything, suddenly contradict himself with the messages he's passing through the angel Gabriel to Muhammad? And Muhammad came up with a brilliant solution. He came up with this idea called abrogation, which is he tells his followers, if I give you something today that contradicts what I told you before, then what I give you today takes precedence over everything else. And what that did in the Quran is the last true set of commandments that Muhammad gave his followers can be found in the 9th surah of the Quran, the 9th chapter. You find the verse of the sword in there. You find the verse, it's kill them wherever you find them, and blah, 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 blah. Some of the most violent stuff in the Quran right there. This is the key surah that terrorists use again and again and again to justify their violence. Because what they're saying is that because this comes at the end of the Quran, basically, it abrogates anything that comes before it. This is not, it's not poverty. If it was poverty, you'd see Egyptian Christians, you would see Palestinian Christians, and they'd be running around blowing up buses and throwing acid in the face of schoolgirls and stuff like that. This is about a totalitarian ideology. Islam is not just a religion, it's a political ideology as well.
Have you gotten death threats?
Yes.
Are you going to elaborate on that, or are you just going to give me a yes?
What I was instructed is that you're not supposed to go into detail and talk about how you receive them, how they managed to get the threat to you, and that also to talk about specifics is actually giving them more power and encouraging them, and hey, we got to him, and what we wanted him to hear from us, he did hear from us. So that's what I've been counseled, is not to go into detail on any of the threats that I've received.
You use the term in your book, war on terror, but this current administration has decided not to use that term. What are we supposed to call this?
First of all, let's be very clear. I can use an Obamanism. Let me be perfectly clear. This isn't about me. Let me be perfectly clear. I never liked the term war on terror to begin with, because it was like declaring in World War II, instead of war on Nazis, it would be like we declared war on Blitzkrieg. It would be like the Romans declaring, war on elephants instead of Carthage. It's a tactic. But we've gotten so politically correct in this country and in the West in general that it was so sticky. We didn't want to offend the Islamic community. And that to me is ridiculous, that we haven't declared war on, if you want to call it Islamic fundamentalism, that's fine. I think that's redundant. We're back to what I said before about Osama Bin Laden practicing Islam exactly the way Muhammad wanted it practiced. So yes, I use war on terror because we had 8 years of that term, and it's the one it's part of the lexicon.
I want to ask you about torture, because your main character, Scot Harvath, doesn't have a problem with it. In fact, that's pretty much how he gets all the information he gets in this story is from torture. I think, in your book, there was kind of more of a compelling case for it. There was an attack that was going to happen like in the next 48 hours.
The ticking time bomb scenario, right.
But what about it if it's not that way?
Well, first of all, I am writing fiction. I'm writing thrillers. I think people want to believe that the good guys are willing to do this if it's going to save human lives. And I think the enemy, especially when we're dealing with Islamic terrorists, I think they're just as horrific as the Nazis. I think we are absolutely dealing with pure black evil that, again, is just like the Nazis. I mean, this couldn't be more white hat, black hat kind of thing that we used to see in the cowboy movies. Torture in general, in the real world, when pretty please with sugar on top doesn't work, you move to the next thing. And does that mean you're waterboarding somebody all of a sudden? No. I think that torture does have a place. But there's also this other thing that should be exhausted first, these harsh interrogation methods. And if that means turning up the air conditioner in a room or turning on loud music or not letting people sleep or putting them in stress positions, I'm okay with that if that's going to save a life.
Critics would say that we're forfeiting our values, that this is not what it means to be an American. And once we've done that, we've lost.
I think that is an argument that's been put forth by the left. I don't agree with that we're forfeiting our values at all. I think that the only way to preserve our culture, our civilization, to stop us from being completely overrun by Islamic fundamentalists is to fight back and to use any tool. Hey, if there's a nuke, this is the other thing. If you had walked onto the floor, the main floor at the New York Times on September 12th and said, there's more airplanes coming. We've got one guy, and we've got a pretty good idea that he knows who's flying the airplanes, when they're coming, and which buildings they're going to hit. I bet you would have found a lot of people that said, do whatever you have to that SOB to get the information out of them. It's a great luxury to be removed from the threat of imminent death and to say that you shouldn't use harsh interrogation techniques. And people quibble, is it torture? There's a lot of stuff that people want to categorize as torture that I don't believe is torture, that I put under the category of harsh interrogation techniques. And, I don't think that – and here's the other thing. I don't think we should be taking as many prisoners as we do. I think most of the people we've been rounding up should be killed on the battlefield. I don't think that you should be able to fire every RPG you have in your backpack, empty all your magazines, drop your AK-47 and raise your hands and expect to get 3 hots in a cot and a lawyer at Gitmo. Most of these people don't have any intelligence value. And you know what, Mimi? We hear a lot about the Geneva and Hague Conventions. And Ralph Peters wrote a great article called Kill, Don't Capture, where he covered a lot of this. And he said, everybody wants to talk about the Geneva and Hague Conventions, but they've never read them. To be a lawful combatant, you have to appear on the battlefield with some sort of insignia. Even when we send our special operations folks, we actually have laws on the books that if you go in a black uniform, when you're about to do what you're going to do, you have to peel the cover off the American flag. There's actually a law in the books that says when you do your act, you've got to do that. To be counted under the Geneva and Hague Conventions, that's what you've got to do. So this idea that somehow we're violating these people's rights and that they're covered on the Geneva and Hague Conventions, these people hide behind women and children. And you know what? When people appeared in previous conflicts, World War II, World War I, if you showed up dressed like a civilian and you hid yourself among civilian populations so that you could sneak up on soldiers who were brave enough to show up on the battlefield in uniform, and you tried to attack them, you didn't get a trial. You didn't go to Gitmo. We killed you on the spot.
Brad Thor is in the studio with me. He's a New York Times bestselling author. His book is called Foreign Influence. Speaking of children, your novel that's called The First Commandment, you have terrorists targeting children, schools, school buses. Are you fear-mongering?
No, actually, there's a lot of information out there. You do a Google search and you'll find there have been many FBI warnings put out about terrorists trying to get jobs as school bus drivers that we've had.
But what do you mean terrorists trying to get jobs as school bus drivers?
There are people that have been in this country that we have suspected have ties to terrorist organizations who the FBI has put out alerts to be on the lookout for specific people that they believed were trying to get licenses, the specific licenses, to become bus drivers. We have had suspicious activity of men that meet certain criteria in terrorist profiles that have come across the border from Canada trying to purchase used school buses. There's been a lot of activity that suggests to law enforcement that terrorists are very interested in getting a hold of school buses. Now, is this so that they can blow up a busload of children? Maybe. Is it because they want to get a school bus that they can fill with other terrorists and get close to a school filled with equipment and be able to quickly – I mean, how can you can't get a big vehicle any closer to a school than a school bus. And if they want to pull off a Beslan-style attack like happened in Russia, would that be a great way to do it? So that's not fear-mongering. My books are as rooted in reality as possible. I really think that reality and truth and details as they exist in the real world are the bedrock of a great thriller.
So what needs to be done to stop these terrorist plots that you say are already taking place in the United States?
What's a great I think that the rules of engagement need to be loosened. I think that's one thing. I think we think so highly of ourselves, and deservedly so, but we've allowed politics to get too deep into our war fighting. I mean, politics and war have always been intertwined. I mean, the Romans had to deal with it. But I think we make it too difficult for our brave men and women, particularly in the CIA and other covert organizations, be they in the intelligence community or in the military. We make it too hard for them to do their jobs. There's too much bureaucracy. There's too many people, in particular in the intelligence community, at the management and leadership level that are more concerned with preserving their position, that are risk adverse, than in getting the job done.
But then you run the risk of having cowboys out there, saying, "Oh, I'm gonna do this on my own without any set rules of engagement." I mean,
you should have.
Your character is a nice guy, and he always gets the guy at the end.
But I think that you don't have cowboys if you hire and train properly and have an existing set of rules. What I'm saying, I'm not for let's take the rules away. I'm not into anarchy and just set them loose. But what I am about is giving them a realistic look at our enemies have no playbook. They have no rules. So it's the playing field is, it was President Bush who said we need to be lucky 365 days a year. They only need to be lucky once. So the playing field is already tilted in their advantage. And I'm not saying that we just take the gloves off because we are a civilized society. We talked about this a little bit earlier when we talked about torture and does it compromise our values. I believe we should have rules, but I want to be right up to the very edge. I want to give the brave men and women who are willing to go hunt these people down, who are not doing it maybe for the paycheck, but because they love this country and want to keep us safe.
But what do we do when we've got like these lone gunman types, like Major Hasan in Fort Hood, who he might not be a member of a cell, he might not be a member of Al-Qaeda, but he's still inspired, and he's decided to take his jihad on the road. So
you've got the lone jihad scenario. It's one guy.
Okay, but what do we do, short of becoming a police state?
Well, we can't. Absolutely, we cannot become a police state. But look, with Hasan, how many red flags were there? How many people didn't want to flag him because they thought, oh gosh, I'm an Islamophobe. That's great. That in the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE and all of these people that I just absolutely despise, they really have found a way to co-opt that political correctness and turn it to their advantage. You're not allowed to question Islam. You're not allowed to question Islamic doctrine. Heaven forbid that Hasan's peers questioned, is this guy really stable? What's going on? Does he pose a threat?
Right. Or is he loyal to the United States?
Yeah, it's okay to go after Christians. It's okay to, and I'm not saying there's a big effort out there to persecute Christians, but it's okay to call into question that stuff. But we seem to have this reluctance to put Islam under a microscope. And I'm not saying it should be undeservedly so, but Islam puts itself at a position where, and I like to, this is a line that I use, and I always say, yeah, Islam is a religion of peace, and if you say it isn't, we'll kill you. That somehow Islam is above critique, exploration, examination, parody. It's okay to go make fun of Christians, Buddhists, Mennonites, but not Islam.
I was surprised the Christmas Day attempted airliner bombing. You remember that?
Right.
The first thing we heard was, from our government, the system worked. And then we heard we failed to connect the dots. Frankly, it seems that they didn't even see the dots to connect them in the first place. I mean, are we just supposed to hope for luck here?
I mean, the guy's father walked into one of our embassies and basically said, you need to be watching out for this guy. So what do we do? After 9/11 and things like that, how do we make things better for our fight against our enemies? We added more bureaucracy. And never once in the history of the United States government has more government made for more efficient execution of government. So this is what I was saying before, though, Mimi. We need to give our people a set of rules that give them the best tools possible to go after these people so that they can connect the dots. It's the bureaucracy that prevents that.
But I think it's a failure to see that this is an ideology that we're fighting.
Oh, I would agree 100%. That is a huge portion of it as well.
And it does seem that members of the administration are very, very reluctant and flat out refuse to see this as a fight against an ideology.
And do you know why?
No.
Because they're cowards. And it's not just this administration. The Bush administration was packed with cowards who did not. Let me roll that back. There were people that were so concerned about not offending the Muslim the Muslim population on the whole, that they tiptoed around it instead of saying, you know what, sorry, you can't be silent about this. Listen, if there were Catholics, we'd be marching in the street. If Catholics were running around blowing up buses and doing stuff like this, they'd say this is wrong. And you do see that. You do see some Muslim groups that get out there. But my gosh, this is a huge religion. We're talking, as we said, 1.3 billion people, whatever. Where's the outcry? And it's not a tiny minority. If we're talking about 10% of the Islamic faith who's doing this, we're talking about over 100 million people who believe who have the jihadist mindset, who believe that, and the polls show that are being done throughout the Muslim world. So, when I say the Bush administration was shot through full of cowards, I don't mean everyone was a coward. I mean, when it comes to this issue about confronting Islam, in making Islam in general take responsibility for a problem within its midst, nobody's done that. Nobody has said to the Islamic community on the whole, this is your problem. You need to step up and start working on it.
Brad Thor, he's a New York Times bestselling author. His 9th book is called Foreign Influence, and it's published by Atria Books. Brad, thanks so much for being on the program.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mimi.
Up next, 2-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for The Washington Post, Gene Weingarten. You're listening to The Mimi Geerges Show on the web at mgshow.org.